Hiya and welcome. I am Sabrina, and this is Every 7 Years, a podcast inspired by the fact that every 7 years, you essentially have a new body. And this body has been created by you, by your habits, your choices, your environment, your lifestyle. Like nature, you are constantly cycling and rebuilding. And just like a tree requires ample water and nutrients, fresh air and sunlight, you too require constant attention and proper care. But in today's society, we've become really distracted and very good at ignoring the cues our body shows us. But your sensitivity is a superpower. So if you are curious about how to become more of your favorite you, join me here every week for deep dives intended to inspire you to uncover the wisdom within us all so that you can live with more ease, confidence, and joy. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the podcast, episode 1. I am Sabrina, and I am so happy to be here. I've been intending to podcast for 7 years, ironically, or maybe there is no irony in there. I think it's taken me 7 years to process the things that I wanted to talk about that I knew I was going through. And I think I've needed this cycle, this time to feel that it's true, that you can transform and change your body and your mind and your life. And this is Piper. If you're watching on video, she is the cattle dog / terrier that is pawing at my shoulder here. And she's been the inspiration behind a lot of the reason, honestly, for this podcast and for my health. I got her back in 2015. She is 9 years old. And it was only around 2015 that my health started to become an issue, and doing things like going on regular walks out in nature started to become a therapy for me. But I digress. I was going to try and introduce this podcast and what it's going to be about and talk about what I'm going to share with you guys today before we dive into further episodes. So just to get some science on, as you probably heard in the podcast introduction, every 7 to 10 years, your cells in your body have been so productive that your whole body has essentially been replaced. Like nearly every part of itself is new every 7 years. So if you are listening right now and you are 50 years old, you do not have a 50-year-old colon. Actually, there's parts of your colon that are only 3 to 5 days old. That is mind-blowing to me. And when I learned this fact, I wrote it down in a notebook and then started a podcast about it. Because essentially, while your cells do divide and regenerate, as old versions of your eyelash cells, for example, die, new eyelash cells are born from the last copy. And this happens over and over and over again until it runs out of ability to do so, until it runs out of telomeres. What the heck are telomeres? Telomeres are these sequences at the tip of our chromosomes that essentially act as like the copy-paste process. And these cell copies, which our body becomes made up of at every moment, can actually replace themselves in a more prime state or in a poorer one, aka a mutated state. And that is essentially what aging is if you had to describe it to somebody. And I think sitting here today, knowing that I am this new collection of cells than I was 7 years ago is so cool to me. Now, all this said, there are certain cells that do remain much the same as the day that you were born, like ones inside of your brain and your brain neurons responsible for memory because, memory, that's kind of the function of it. But more or less, it is how we treat our current cells that dictates the future versions of those cells. So in other words, how I'm treating my skin and my kidneys today will either result in healthier skin and kidneys or not. And there are 30 trillion cells in the average human body. I'm a woman, so I have around 28 trillion. Men actually have 36 trillion. And nearly half of them are under 7 years old. And as you begin to recognize this, or at least as I did, I felt like, damn, I should take better care of my body. And also, wow, The things that I might have issues with, or the things that I thought were lifelong, or just because I was like getting old in quotation marks, might not actually be the case. Maybe it's something I have or have not done in this past 7-year cycle, period. And I find that so empowering. Like 7 years is long, but it's not that far off to think that if you just shifted a little healthier every day, that you could be better functioning 7 years from now. And like for better or for worse. This is the result of your choices, your habits, your mindset, your lifestyle. They all show up in your body and in how you appear and feel and function. So while I know it sounds kind of crazy, when you look in the mirror, you are truly glimpsing the results of all of your habits and practices over the last 7 years. Everything that you have performed and done and consumed and thought or not done is showing up right now. And what I find really cool is that renewal process happens over and over and over again until it doesn't. Your body does not just simply degrade over time naturally. I feel like we've gotten that idea and aging so wrong, thinking that we just slowly get worse. You only slowly get worse if you are continuing to slowly neglect yourself. And I feel like there's this idea that once you've hit 30, you're past your prime and aging happens and you can't handle a hangover as well, or alcohol, and these kinds of narratives. But in my experience, being in my 30s has been the most joyous and healthy years of my life, which just proves to me that age has nothing to do with it. And for me, I can see my 40s and 50s getting progressively better. Not because I think I'm special, but because I know that that is a possibility. I know that if I continue to care for my liver properly, it's going to continue to make healthy cell replications of itself. And obviously, there will be a point where that telomere hits its limit and it will degrade, but I can probably avoid a lot of pain by taking better care of myself, knowing that. The problem is that this message is just like not portrayed in traditional media because, quite frankly, most traditional media has an agenda to get you to neglect yourself and outsource your healing and wellness to others, thinking that unless you're hiring all of these people and taking medications and requiring constant care and prescriptions, you're probably not healthy. You're degrading if you're not doing that. But the reality is that you can partake in habits that increase your quality and length of life. And then you can also participate in ones that shorten it and make it worse. And the secret lies in our telomeres, which you heard me mention earlier. So if we are going to get sciencey, first I do have to say that there are some cells that don't replace. For everyone who's like, oh, what a podcast title, it's a lie. You know, there are other organs that renew over 7 years. Some take 8 years, some take 70. But for the most part, they're under 7 years. And here is the thing about that. That ability to divide and make a new cell is limited. And the number of times that this can happen is what determines our lifespan. And this limit on cell division is actually known as the Hayflick limit. And the crazy news is we can influence it. Lengthening, shortening, living longer, and having our quality of life be better. Basically, every time our cell divides, the telomere shortens and eventually gets to a point where it's so short that it can't ensure good functioning cells by making new ones. So eventually the cell just dies. And obviously, once that cell is dead, that organ or thing won't function. And that's kind of why we end up perishing. So this shortening process of these telomeres is natural, but we have now proof that things do influence it. And one of the things that can lengthen your telomeres and lengthen your life and improve the quality of your life might be one of the most annoying things to hear, but science has actually shown that meditating can lengthen your telomeres. I know. I actually personally find it hard, despite being a yoga and breathwork instructor. Meditation is one of the hardest things for me because I'm a go, go, go Sagittarius person. So I have found that thinking about this fact that with every breath, you are literally lengthening your life and improving the quality of your life might help you. It also might help, which helps me, to go on walking meditations. I also find personally, too, while I love podcasts and find a lot of value in just throwing them on to do housework or go for a walk, I do find it helpful to have one act a day where you aren't experiencing an input, where you don't have a podcast on, where the only input is from within. It's a within put, if I may. Being consciously just with yourself every day in some form, whether that's when you're getting ready in the morning or when you're working out, just at one point of the day, not having a distraction or a screen or your technology on is going to help you live longer. And outside of meditation, telomeres can be lengthened also by, you're going to hear me be a broken record, our habits, our choices, our environment, our lifestyle. I'm repeating myself, but essentially it's up to us. And things that shorten our telomeres is stress, poor diet, and lack of exercise, bad sleep. Whereas conversely, healthy diet, getting consistent regular exercise, really great sleep, minimizing your stress and exposure to harmfuls, getting sunlight, this can actually help slow down the aging process. And so this is the end of the sciencey stuff, and I'll get more into my own story, but I just think it's cool that the impact of our choices and our habits and our mindset and our lifestyle are starting to literally become evident. We're proving these things. And it's also felt. I have personally felt the effects of making these changes and feeling two extremely different bodies and minds. And that is what has inspired me to do this podcast, has been my own personal transformations, and not always for the better. When I was a teenager, I went through 2 cycles, 14 years of struggling with an eating disorder and really not liking myself. And it's only been in this last 7-year cycle that I've experienced happiness and probably the best health of my life, even though I'm still a work in process. We're always either allowing for our body's healing process to occur, or we are hindering that natural cycle. There's nothing in between. And I also love that this isn't inherently meaningful. It's up to you to make that mean something one way or the other. And understanding all of this is the point of the podcast for me. So in researching this 7-year fact, I did also come to realize how integral 7 years is to so many things. Our 7 chakras, our 7 colors in the rainbow spectrum, the 7 deadly sins, 7 notes on the musical scale. There are even 7 days in each phase of the moon. There are 7 passageways to heaven in ancient Egypt. There are 7 candles on the Jewish menorah, 7 layers of purgatory, 7 wonders of the world, the 7 seas, the 7 main planets. Like, I could go on. And I kept seeing 7 come up as this number of significance. And another thing that came up was around the importance of ages 0 through 7, then 7 to 14, then 14 to 21, 21 to 28, and so on. I mean, I'm sure you can even think in your own lifetime, just even like maturity wise and where you were at in each stage mentally is so vitally different, or at least it is for me. Like when you think of being a kid, you probably sort of recall it all under the age of 7. Like that's kind of just the amalgamous blob of like 0 through 7. It's kind of like you have this one brain and experience and kid time. Then there's this chunk of life from 7 to 14 where you're kind of growing up a little bit and your body's changing. It's like you want to be a grown up. It's that stage where you want to be an adult and you're kind of over being a kid. And then you get to 14 to 21 and you're in this like rite of passage into teenhood and early adulthood, which feels like a whole new chapter and world, and experiencing maybe like negative things for the first time more conscious. Then there's this whole growing up section of a whole other set of firsts from 21 to 27, maybe more serious relationships or moving out or traveling solo or living abroad and educating yourself and so on and so on. And when I think of my own life and how these cycles have gone, I definitely reflect on my childhood. And I think that's when I was my most true self and authentic, like pre ages 7, maybe even pre 14, where you're like a kid and you're more just conscious of yourself and your own inner world. And I thrived in that environment. And I think that everyone becomes a little more conscious of others around teenhood, or at least when I was growing up in the 90s, like our society was very masculine and focused on achievements, and everything was about like competitions, and it was like American Idol and Survivor and America's Next Top Model. And that's when I think we tend to lose ourselves a little bit. Maybe it was just me, but I know it wasn't just me. I don't think I'm very unique in that. And quite honestly, until I was 27, I went through 14 years of suffering without knowing how to be myself and being unwilling to be myself. Like I said, it was only up until this last 7-year cycle of my life, from 27 to now 33, 34, that I've been able to turn the beat around. And I've started working with my health and nourishing and loving and moving my body as opposed to neglecting it. And I am ready to share everything that I have learned in this process, all in the hopes that it can help you. I have become more of my true self, and in doing so have become happier. And that's what I want to help you with. But this isn't like biohacking, do as I say, even though you're listening to me right now, ironically. But it is more about learning how to tune into the nuances of your body and your mind. And then once you've tuned into them, knowing how to give them what they need and what they're telling you, knowing how to interact with that. Like just like a tree requires the right amounts of sunlight and shade and water and nutrients in just the right times and moments, you too are nature, and you also require that constant care and attention. And it's my hope that in sharing my experience of learning how to care for myself, that I can empower you to tune into yourself and feel into your needs. Because that's the journey that I've been on. And I've gone the long, painful way with lots of trial and error. But there is wisdom within. And that wisdom within has been what has guided me to live with more ease and happiness. And it might take 7 years for you. It did for me, which I also kind of find empowering. Like, this isn't P90X. This isn't even 75 hard. This isn't something you're going to try on or do for even a year. This is 7 years. This is how our changes happen. I think we can all make some goals to become more of our favorite selves 7 years from now, right? Think of how far you've come, even in the last 7 years. If you rewind the clock, that is back to 2017. Shit. Like all of our lives have changed since then. I'm sure we can argue, right? So have some appreciation for the fact that things take time. You require time. You are your full-time job. I can even be harsh on myself for this. Like, oh, what have I even done in the last 7 years? But 7 years ago, I wasn't even living where I live now. This house that I've renovated with my partner wasn't ours. I had just broken up with my fiance. And then in the months to follow, I was selling all of my furniture and booking a yoga retreat in Bali and traveling solo for 2 weeks and dating. I was still an HGTV host 7 years ago. I co-hosted my own home renovation show, and I was blogging and doing brand deals like left and right and so busy and totally loving and eating up hustle culture. I even made hats that said hustle. Like, what? I'm living a very different life now. I lived in Milton, Ontario, and I commuted for hours a day to work and film for 10 or more hours a day. I was in a city all of the time. And sadly, I was on year 14 of calorie counting and not liking myself and restricting. And I was just diagnosed with Hashimoto's thyroiditis. 7 years ago, I was very unhappy and unhealthy and inauthentic and just going through the motions of life like I had learned or been conditioned to do. I was a top tier people pleaser, and I was using my achievements to validate my worth all the time, to myself even. And I kind of learned this from a young age. Like I think a lot of us do, but I've also been really sensitive my whole life and observant and not known what to do with that. I have memories of being a kid and questioning things I was even taught in school, but then still acing every test, you know, just to get through it, just to get it over with. Even in relationships, I would literally just go through the motions just to get to the other side. I would not even necessarily like people I was dating. And I would just say yes in order to get through it and avoid having to disappoint them. I don't even know what I was trying to get to the other side of. I think I just never had the goal to be happy. It was just to appease other people. You know, I was literally in a post-school program called Junior Achievers by my own accord. When I graduated with my Bachelor of Applied Arts in Illustration, I graduated with honors and at the top of my class, even though it's art. And I needed to and wanted to. And even when I was filming in my mid-20s, during those HGTV days, being myself on television, I would still abandon or ignore my needs just to make for a more efficient or faster filming day, or a better scene, or make the homeowner feel comfortable. And I would be validated for it, you know, like people would hire me for it. People would like me for it, down to being a teenager and just being the house that hosted fun parties for friends. There'd be so many times I would wake up upset or not want to do it for whatever reason. And instead of being honest with the close people in my life, I would just put on a face and try to have fun. I've always been really good at undermining my own feelings and my own wants and literally mind over mattering them. Not that I even knew what my wants were, though. And I think that was part of the problem. I just avoided figuring that out. I didn't want to learn myself. And so really early on, I just pleased everyone else instead of figuring out what I wanted. It was also convenient that by performing well, I wouldn't have to be myself or maybe be unliked for being myself. There wasn't pressure there. If someone didn't like it, it didn't have to hurt me because I wasn't showing myself anyways. I wouldn't have to learn myself. I wouldn't have to feel bad feelings associated with being myself. You know, I wouldn't have to stand by my guns. I wouldn't have to develop boundaries or any grit. And these are hard things to do. I could just be this malleable blob and cog in the machine. And I lived like that until I was 26, 27, at which point I was obviously diagnosed with my autoimmune disease and adrenal fatigue. And the thing is that sadly, I don't think I am unique in this in any way. That's why we have words and books and podcasts on everything about codependency and people pleasing and the impacts of hustle culture. You know, it's a big enough problem for a lot of people because we're socialized to care about others. That is acceptable. That's actually noble, caring for others above yourself. Caring for the self is not really socialized to seem healthy or like something you should do daily. In fact, it's been socialized to seem negative or selfish. But I digress. Now, 7 years later, and I see no irony there, I'm 33 and I am happy, which is honestly the most important thing. I'm also not burnt out anymore. I've stopped calorie counting and restricting entirely for the first time in my adult life. I've been training my body and how to nourish and move it. And I'm in love with my body and what it does for me now. I've traveled solo to Asia multiple times to train. I'm now a yoga and a breathwork teacher. I love myself, like huge win, even though I still have issues, of course. I'm obsessed with self-care and slowing down, and I used to be the exact opposite, priding myself on going faster and ignoring my needs because that was noble. I'm running my own personal care business called Healer, inspired by my blue healer you saw earlier. And I live in a different part of the world in Whistler, BC, no longer in a city. And I'm in a healthy, happy relationship where we're honest and I feel secure and authentic in it. And I'm doing all of the things that little me loved to do again. I'm exploring nature and I'm playing outside. We bought a Nerf ball and just toss it in the tennis courts. I'm gardening, I'm cooking and enjoying that again. I'm reading and learning about astronomy and astrology and self-concept work still, because I've always honestly been a little obsessed with the self, and I would read about that as a kid, but this time it's as an adult with healthy resources and a point of view instead of 17 magazine, you know? And yeah, sometimes I still have bad days where I'm like, what am I even doing? But once again, putting things into that 7-year cycle context is actually really gratifying. And for me, helps me feel appreciative of myself. So think about that yourself and reflect back from now until 2017. Like, wow, maybe you can have some compassion for your body that's gotten you through. And now is the result of how you've used this time. So reflect with some kindness and be gentle, and maybe make a little commitment right now to better honor your body for this next 7-year cycle. Because here is the thing, here is the beauty to all of this. That transformational shift that I experienced, where I went from being very unhappy to actually feeling happy and at peace for the first time in my adult life, it was all up to me all along, and it always is. No one else can give you calmness or strength or peace in your body and in your mind except for yourself. It is literally up to you and what you pay attention to and what you care about. Care is everything. And what we care about on a day-to-day basis acts as the driving force of our thoughts and our actions, which become our reality. Actually, in ancient wisdom traditions, they called care the generative principle. And this dynamic of care is unfortunately now called the lost principle, because we've become so distracted and out of touch with our body's senses that we don't even pay enough attention in order to care. We don't pause long enough to sit and feel and react often. I never did. It was actually only when I was 26, this 7-year ago period, and having a filming break from my television show, that I had the first time off that I've ever had in my life where I didn't feel this need to work or pursue things or hustle, because I knew that the next season of filming was just around the corner. And it was only in this summer when I literally had time off that everything hit me in the face. Having space and time and not being distracted by our devices or working or worrying is how you can begin to care for yourself again. If you've lost it all and you feel like, frick, I have been in a good cycle of self-neglect. The best thing that you can do is start now to sit down and feel your feelings and then react to them. Even now, if you sit with your eyes closed, even hitting pause on the podcast to just feel, you might actually get some sensations that you weren't in tune to before because we're listening to things and doing things and multitasking. And these are things you might want to listen to. And you can get better and better at that. This was something that I struggled with. I avoided listening to anything my body told me for years. And so when I found myself sitting in my backyard with time off, literally with nothing to do but just meditate in the sun without knowing I was doing that, I was fully expecting bliss, in that action. But I got what I needed instead, which was all of the feelings and all of the things that were coming up that were misaligned for me and inauthentic for me that needed to be addressed. Everything that was painful that I needed to surfaced, and I felt it. And I had avoided feeling these feelings forever. But it was only when I had time and space to be able to process them and listen to them that it all started becoming really obvious to me. And it's kind of a string that you start pulling and can't stop. But we've become so distracted and we outsource so much. Like if we even want to eat something healthy, we might first go to the supermarket and look for the sticker that says healthy or plant-based, as opposed to knowing and being so in tune with our body to know what it wants and needs right now and then giving it that. Instead of observing, we tend to pre-think and plan and absorb, and we go instead of going slow. Or at least I did, and that's what led to all of my issues. Because for better or worse, care, or lack thereof, is the ultimate generator of the quality of our life and of all of our experiences. And because you're in charge of your choices, if you're an adult listening to this, and because these choices add up to create you and your body and your life, you are creating your reality and your experiences. Like newsflash. Talk about manifesting. Whether you believe in it or not, it's happening right now. You are constantly creating your life. And I find it so empowering to know that you are the creator and it's happening in every moment. Like truly, we are nature. And like a tree or a plant, we need such specific tending to and such specific nourishment and support. And no one plant needs the same as another. Even plants of the same variety in the same garden might get just a little bit of different attention from you and the local wildlife, a different hit or, light cast from the sun, just a little bit of a different rainwater flow, etc. And we are all like that too. We all need something a little different. But to give yourself what you need, you first have to understand what your needs are. You need to know your needs in order to meet your needs. And I didn't know my needs, so I could never meet them. And that's been a 7-year process of learning what they are and how to meet them. And in that process, let me tell you, you're going to have to be willing to disappoint others. And up until that point, being 27, this was just something I was unwilling to do because it was just too painful to disappoint others. I just have been really sensitive and I could pick up on cues if I did disappoint someone or let someone down, even if I didn't care about their opinion. I just wanted to avoid doing that at all costs because it doesn't feel good to do that. But what I can tell you is it feels worse to do that to yourself and disappoint yourself over and over and over. And that's where I got to 7 years ago, when I felt like despite all of this success in quotation marks, it meant nothing to me because I wasn't impressed with myself. As the creator of this like amazing reality in life, the reality of my dreams on paper, or so I thought, as the artist, I stood back and I didn't like the art. It wasn't representative of what was inside. And if you don't like the art that you're making, you've got to change it. And so in the process of making yourself happy, you'll probably disappoint other people. And that's okay. Maybe that's part of your healing. Honestly, it was part of mine to learn that it's okay if others don't like it or like you or agree with you. It doesn't mean they hate you, or maybe it does, and so be it. And you might disappoint people in the process of becoming more of your true self. You will. But after a while, I promise you that life does become easier because you're not hiding your agendas or underlying feelings anymore. You're day to day in authenticity, tuning in at every moment to see what you need and reacting accordingly while still functioning, hopefully, as a normal, nice human, ideally. And that is what I am so obsessed with. So if you are too, you'll probably like this podcast because it's all about individuality and self-healing and supporting our unique bodies to do what they were designed to do. But it's deeper than just diet and exercise. And not just for me, for everybody. It's everything. It's your mindset. It's the thoughts that you allow in. It's the products that you use, both in your home and on your body. It's your choices. It's the fabrics. It's if you had enough time in nature. And so it can be really overwhelming. I get it. And I was at that point back 7 years ago. So I want to try to parse this out in ways that will be helpful for you. And this is all stuff I'm going to discuss here on the podcast. Everything that I have found personally in the last 7 years of my life since 2017, since that moment that I literally pulled the plug on my life and looked myself in the mirror and had no idea who I was and was forced to find out. All of the things that I've not shared about my life since this journey began for me back in 2017, I'm going to be sharing it on this podcast and beyond, because there are still a lot of things that I struggle with. I am not dead. I am a work in progress. And I'm still not in perfect health. I still struggle with things like negative self-talk. I just found out I have some genetic mutations like COMT, which affect my dopamine levels I'm exploring. And it's all of these kinds of things that I'm going to explore with you here live on the podcast. So I will be chatting about all of this in future episodes, but I also want to make sure you know that just because I've also had to do this work, this acceptance work, this doesn't mean that I'm a project or that you're a project. We're not a problem to be fixed. And I thought I was. But as I learned the hard way, and as y'all come to learn, you're actually this like really beautiful, complex work of live art. You are a vibrating electromagnetic being. You are the artist in control. You know, meaning in life is not found. It's not something you stumble upon or get old enough and find. Meaning is created. The meaning in your life will be created by the things that you give attention to, by giving power to what makes you feel excited. And so in sharing what makes me excited and what I've learned, I just really hope that others can participate, not just in my growth, but in your own growth. Because it is time that we be brave and pull up the roots and shake them out a little bit and look at what the heck is going on in there. It's time to embrace and see our sensitivity as a superpower, because that's what it is. So, if you're curious about how to become more of your favorite true you, you can join me here every single week on Every 7 Years for deep dives intended to inspire you to uncover that inner wisdom so that you can live with more ease and confidence and joy in your life. If you've listened this far, thank you so much. I hope that you subscribe and share with a friend, and I will catch you next week.